to introduce our speaker today, Lori Oschefski. She got here early. She set up this wonderful display, a beautiful quilt and a really great poster. She also has books for sale at the back of the room. Lori founded this charitable organization and has done incredible amount of research to sort of disclose all of the challenges that were faced by British home children. And just in reading the poster and reading about Lori's background, it's really one of those stories that I think, certainly I didn't know. I had a pretty picture of orphan children frolicking in the fields of farmland in Ontario, and I think the story is very, very different. Lori's here to enlighten us and to make sure that we are not continuing in our, I said, the phrase that always comes to my mind in situations like this is to be ignorant of the past is to remain forever a child, and hopefully we'll have some growing up to do today. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you for having me out today, and thank you for all coming out to hear the story of the home children. Kimberly, this is my first visit up here. What a wonderful community. I just absolutely love it. It's beautiful. I went over, to the general store over there before I started today. They gifted me a loaf of their famous sourdough bread, sourdough bread. And, I just love that little general store. So if you haven't been over there and you're done today, go over and visit. I mean, they've got a lot of great stuff in there. So how many of you are connected to the home children here today? Okay, and how many here are connected and know about the home children? Okay, how many think these are the orphans that came over during the Second World War? Nobody? Did you? Yeah, you did? Yeah. A lot of people think they were. They were over 100,000 children that were forcibly immigrated from all areas of the UK and brought to Canada to become indentured servants, labourers, and domestics. It's a myth that they were orphans. Only 12% of these children were in fact true orphans. So it's a little bit different of a story than most people think it is. My personal connection comes from my mother. I'm actually a first and second generation born to home children. Both my mother, that's her rocking the 80s up, or the 60s up there. She was really cool. I like that picture. And that was the first picture of her taken when she arrived in Canada. She came to Canada at the age of 2. Now, home children typically went from toddlers up to the age of 18, girls up to the age of 21. And what would they do with toddlers? You can't put them out to work on the farms, can you? But what they would do is they would board them out, and then when they were old enough to work, they would remove them from their boarding family and reassign them to other farms where they would be then put to work. When I dug deep into my mom's story of being a home child, which by the way, she didn't say a word to me until she was 86 years of age. And that's the story that you're going to find that is so common with the home children. They didn't talk about it. They didn't want anybody to know that they were home children. I mean, some of the ones that maybe, had better homes maybe would talk about it, but my mom had a good home. And she still didn't talk about it. She didn't really even know. At the age of 2, her whole life as an infant and stuff was a complete blank to her. And at 86, she decided she wanted to know. And some of the things that I had to tell my mom, they were difficult, and I had to think, I mean, you had a woman that's sitting there that's 86 years of age, why am I telling her this stuff? But I also realized that my mother had internalized all of the trauma that she had endured in her earlier years, and also by not knowing that she was, that she was a home child. She was taken in by a kind farming family, and she was never made to work. She went to school, she was educated, she became a nurse, but there was something that was off, and she knew it all her life. And what happened to my mom, and with this recording thing, can you shut that off for a couple minutes? Or does it continue going? Because I don't want this ever. To become a home child, you had to have suffered trauma in your life to begin with, period. So again, it was a myth that they're orphans, only 12% were true orphans. But you had to have suffered some kind of a family breakup, poverty, death of a parent. There had to have been something that happened to you in your life to be taken into care, put into the workhouses, or cast to the streets. So then you take a child who has suffered trauma, and then you put them into these institutions. You separate them from their families. Some deserve to be separated, others didn't. My grandmother most certainly did not deserve to have her children taken from her. And then you put them on a ship, and you send them across to a country where everything marginalizes for them here. And then you put them on farms. And then you just treat them as laborers. 75% of these children suffered abuse and neglect on Canadian farms. How do you cope with that? So, we have over 100,000 children that came, and we have over 100,000 different stories. Some coped, most didn't. I mean, they went on and they created good lives for themselves. I mean, to the whole outside world, our family was wonderful. We had a good home. We had 9 kids. And, but the inside of the home was entirely different than what showed to the public and what showed to the outside of the home. And like I said, her father was a home child who came in 1894 through the Bernardo homes. He was taken out to Russell, Manitoba. Russell, Manitoba is where they sent the older children that were in trouble in the law, with the law in England. He was born in London, England. Both of his parents died, so he was a legitimate orphan. When my mother was taken into care, she was not an orphan in any sense of the word. Both of her parents were still alive. And what happened to her is that he deserted the family. And, how does that all happen? Well, he came to Canada. He had 5 children in Canada. Something happened on the farm in Rosetown. He took the family back to the UK, came back to Canada to, get back up on his feet, and then he returned to the UK to get the family. And my grandmother became pregnant with my mom. And sometime between that and when my mom was born, he deserted them. He did come back to Canada. My grandmother, always the story, because I've connected with all of she had 6 siblings, and I've connected with them all. And the story that she had told them was that he had come back to Canada to sell the farm and was going into Moose Jaw on horseback, and he was murdered. And his body was left to rot with all the buffalo bones out there. And that's what the family believed, and that was not true at all. Not true. I'm not sure why he left the family. I kind of think that my grandmother kind of gave the big push when he came back to get them. I have traveled to England, I've traveled into Lincoln, Herefordshire. I have visited the cottage where my mom was born, and it's such a wonderful community. Like you get the same vibe here in Kimberley. I mean, it was just absolutely wonderful. He stood at the front door of the cottage, and all you could hear was silence, the trickling of the stream that ran through the property, and the bleating of the lambs. It was absolutely wonderful. And when you look at the life in Saskatchewan as a homesteader, you lived in a mud hut, and it was pretty hard work. I mean, I don't blame him for not wanting to come back to Canada. but I'm not sure what really happened. That's just my take on the story. So who were the home children? Like child mass migration began in 1869, and it stopped officially in Canada in 1939, but unofficially it went on until 1949 into Vancouver. So after it officially stopped in Ontario, the Fairbridge homes accepted about 300 more children into Canada. They found a little loophole in the law, and but those children were not treated and didn't fare out much better than the home children did. And as I said, typically from impoverished, orphaned, or destitute backgrounds, but many came from families in need. They were sent under various immigration schemes, often without full consent or understanding. And I hear this story all the time of how, my father was in the dining hall, and they asked who wanted to go to Canada, and he put his hand up and volunteered. So they picked him and sent him to Canada. Well, they told these wonderful stories of what white life was like in Canada. It was all oranges and sunshine over here, apples and sunshine over here. And they, sent, and I do have samples in it as I go along, but sent promotional postcards and all kinds of stuff showing mansions and stuff that these children lived in, and that just wasn't true. Now, had they said to the boys in the dining hall that we're going to send you to Canada, you're going to be indentured, you're going to be servants and laborers, and 75% of you are going to suffer abuse, neglect, some of you are going to be murdered, and how many then would have stuck their hands up and volunteered? Not many. And a child did not need to be born in the UK to be a British home child. My mother had 5 siblings when they went back to England. Those siblings were born in Canada, and they were re-immigrated back to Canada as home children. I have home children that were born in China, United States, others that are born in Canada. So it doesn't matter where you were born. What matters was your family was in the UK when something happened, and you were taken into care. It all began in Victorian England, and I believe that it started, I'm going to scratch that comment. I was going to say mission of rescue. I have evidence that that's categorically untrue too, but you would have thought. I mean, of course, the streets of London were overcrowded with sickness and poverty, and children all over the streets, and something needed to be done. And that's what really began. Institutions started to spring up. Of course, the workhouses were full, and so they would start taking these children into care. In 1869, Maria Ryan had come into the picture, and she was a social reformer. She was immigrating women to Canada prior to getting involved with the children. And Canada didn't want her young ladies because they considered them to be immoral and disease-ridden. So she decided, has anyone heard of the orphan trains in the United States? Yeah, she had traveled down, actually the guy that was doing the orphan trains in the States was in London, England, giving a lecture. She just happened to be at the lecture, and she thought, why don't we work with the kids and not the women? We'll get the kids before they become immoral, and we'll start sending them over to Canada. And so she traveled into the United States to oversee the programs, traveled up to Niagara on the Lake, secured herself a receiving center, went back to the UK and got herself a shipment of kids together in 1869. It came in November of 1869. But there was pushback from the start. This is a cartoon that George Cruikshank published in the UK at the time. And there's Maria Rye standing, by the cart with a whip in her hand. And there's her helpers shoveling children into the cart like street garbage. And the children in the cart, you can get a bigger version of this on the internet. But the children in the cart are crying for their parents. And the other speech bubbles say that, that we're going to take these children far away so that they will never see their relatives ever again. He likened it to the traffic of cattle. And this is first from the very start that that we hear. This is one of our very first, earliest human trafficking scandals. Because that's what it was. It was a trade in children between the countries for the purposes of work. They were exploited. Many were forever separated from their families, from their brothers, their sisters. Many were lied to about what had happened to their relatives, told the parents were dead when they weren't dead. And they were never to be sent back home again. Now, some did. You know, we have 100,000 different stories, but generally speaking, the vast majority of these children never went back home again, never saw their families again, forever separated from brothers and sisters. I mean, my mom never knew her brothers and sisters. Suggested that this disregard for children's welfare was a stain on a so-called Christian and civilized society. Pointed out that such treatment would never be considered for middle-class or upper-class children. Only the poor were subjected to such export. And questioned the claim that children were being saved from poverty, arguing that they were instead being used as cheap labor. And that's as the first shipment of children came, got on the boat to come to Canada. I get criticized often for how I feel or what I know about the home children. It's not even how I feel, it's fact. And people say that, that you're looking at it from the lens of today, and you can't look at it from today's lens. And that's not true. I have been studying the home children since 2007. I have spent years of my life combing through archives, combing through government records, old magazines, to find out what was said yesterday about the home children. So my information that I have my book back there that outlines the child migration programs from start to finish. You're going to find George Cruikshank's cartoon in that book as well too. It's all backed up, 1,000%. And it's yesterday's words and yesterday's eyes that we're looking at with the home children. This was the very first group of home children that came to Canada, and I think we're really fortunate that we even have this picture. It's absolutely amazing. William Skivington was a dedicated socialist and activist who played a central role in Britain's early labour and unemployment movement in the early 19th century. His take on it, he said they were robbed of their childhood and of the opportunity of a sound education. The immigration of young children for working purposes savored of a traffic and child labor carried on between agencies in this country and agencies in Canada. And children would not be allowed to go from the care of the guardians to any, like such conditions in this country. So here's another one that was pointing out that it was human trafficking. Andrew Doyle was sent to Canada in about 1874 to inspect on Maria Rye and Annie McPherson, who were the two main people at that time who were immigrating. So it started with Maria Rye, and then Annie McPherson stepped in. I see it said all the time that it started with Annie McPherson. It didn't. It started with Maria Rye. And his key findings was, he said there was a lack of supervision after placement, children were exploited for unpaid labor, lack of consent or informed placements, misleading promises to families, sending agencies profited from the placements. Okay. Children were forced to repay travel costs. That started with Annie McPherson. Okay. No follow-up. She was famous for that, Maria Rye. She didn't believe in follow-up, or she didn't believe in record keeping. So any of the information that we have on Maria Rye's children has been found by various people. I'm not the first one that started this. We've had a lot of people that have worked beforehand, and we do have a Maria Rye index that's been created. But that was hard work. It was people going to archives, people going through old newspapers, people trying to get any little bit of information that you could. We have no place to get Maria Rye records, except for, those indexes and stuff. severe neglect and abuse in isolated settings. The newspapers of yesterday are littered with stories of abuse and neglect. And when you think you've got it all, the Globe and Mail have just released their archives online, so I've been spending the last week going through these archives, and I'm just finding more and more stuff. We do have a registry, so what am I doing with all this information? We do have a registry which has over 86,000 children in it now, and we have a very strong team of researchers who work on that registry every last single day. And all this information that we're finding is being put in the registry. And again, I didn't start the registry. It started in the 1990s by the late Dr. Perry Snow, who started with one child, and that was his father, Frederick Snow. When he turned the registry over to me in 2014, there was 55,000 children in the registry now. We have about 86,000. We have added about 1,000 children over the past year. But we got a long ways to go before we find all 100,000 children. Now, the Library and Archives Canada also have an index of the home children, but it's not comprehensive like ours. Ours include a complete overview of that child's life. It's going to include the name, when they were born, where they were born, names of parents. Like if we know the information, some we don't, and the pages are just blank, and we're just praying that people get in contact so that we can fill it up. It's got where they died, where they're buried. And I do put snippets about their life, if there's things that we find in newspapers. All of that information is going in there, so that is the most comprehensive index that we have for the home children. So it's a very valuable resource, and I'm pretty proud of the work that everyone's been doing, and the general public. We do have submission pages that you can go on, and you can add your home child's information to the registry. Sometimes it takes me a couple of months to get the names in, so you have to have patience because there's so much work that needs to be done that, I get a little behind on the submissions, but that's a good thing. It's a good thing. It means people are responding, they're adding their information, and the registry only continues to grow. What Andrew Doyle described would be also considered human trafficking today. His report forced a temporary pause, but his warnings were dismissed by the Canadian government. And you can find all of this information online as well too. And what followed was not reform but escalation. The Canadian government also decided that they would start helping fund the ladies to bring more children to Canada. They completely dismissed it. And like I said, it just created escalation, and in the end, there was over 30 sending organizations that became involved. On the heels of Annie McPherson and Maria Rye, Dr. Stevenson from the National Children's Home started, and he brought children into Hamilton. And Dr. Bernardo, the best known of all the sending organizations, stepped in at that point. He kind of waited for all the stuff to settle with the Doyle report. And then, it was like gloves off, and then he came. So, and he was responsible for sending over 35,000 of these 100,000 children to Canada. And in the beginning, the children went up to Hazelbrae, and then we started opening receiving homes in the Toronto area. We've got Emma Sterling, the Church of England Waifs and Strays, the National Children's Home, Catholic Immigration Society. There was all kinds of them. William Patty was actually the only sending organization that was shut down by the Canadian government for his neglect. It was pretty bad. And as I said, most people think that they were the guest children. The guest children arrived in June of 1940 to August of 1940. There was only a few weeks that they actually came to Canada. And yet everyone seems to know about them, but nobody knows about the over 100,000 children. There's 1,500 children that sent with the guest children. But we know about them. But we don't know about them. Why is that? It's because they don't want us to know about it. That's what it is. If it was a good thing that they were doing for these children, we'd all know about it. Like we know about the guest children. The guest children, there's all kinds of stuff that's written in our House of Commons that was discussed in our Parliament about the guest children. They didn't want them to be confused with the home children because the home children were overworked, abused, and stigmatized in this country. So they renamed them guest children. And the idea was they were here to be part of the family. The home children weren't here to be part of the family. Not at all. And, and at the end of the war, they were supposed to go back home to their families. And there was never any intentions of sending the home children back to their families. Now, what happened with the guest children is they had a shipment of children that were coming over from the UK, and the ship that they were on sank. All the children were rescued, and then 2 weeks later, they put the children on a second ship called the City of Benares, which was torpedoed. So the first one was torpedoed, and the second one was torpedoed. I mean, why did we not learn? And that second torpedoing, the ship sank, and 70 of the 90 children aboard that ship died. And that's what shut that program down. And interestingly enough, during the First World War, there was a lot of discussion about sending the kids through the First World War. And Bernardo's was the only one that had a strong pushback against it. So if anything that they've done for the kids, I have to respect that. The Canadian government didn't keep that. They wanted the children bringing. Bernardo's went to the Navy. They had a report, drawn up by the Navy that went on about the dangerous waters and the dangers of sending children through the First World War. That was sent to the Canadian government, and they just turned their noses up at it. And in fact, the Canadian government began to bribe the sending organizations with profits for the children to continue sending them through the war. And that's proof. I can back up everything I have to say. But because of the pushback from the UK, they did stop sending them during the First World War for a few years. But you think they would have learned, the government, that no, we have to lose the lives of 70 children before we get the message in the Second World War. Children were mostly sent in parties, and the heyday, it was often hundreds at a time. I mean, it's not unusual to take a look at a list of over 400 children. They're kind of easy to identify when you're looking on, most of them are anyway, some of them are very difficult. But they're presented like that on the shipping list. It's just a great big long line of children, and sometimes it goes on for pages. And those are all home children. If you see that on Ancestry, you know those are home children coming, because we didn't import kids like that and imported ones any other way except for through home children programs. Each were provided with a trunk or a duffel bag. Now this, where is it? Over there. Yeah. On my sign at the back, I've got different trunks that are up on that sign, so you can see the various ones. But the one that's up here is the most common trunk that was sent here to Canada. So if you happen to come across a trunk that looks like that, with little wheels on the bottom, I can almost guarantee that that's a Bernardo trunk. There isn't too many other trunks that I have seen over my years that resemble that are not Bernardo trunks. So as soon as I see that, somebody posts in the group, is this a home child trunk? I see that and I go, yep. But it's always good to take a look at all the different kinds of trunks, particularly in farming communities, because they're starting to be found. COVID was wonderful for the organization. I got so many trunks during COVID because nobody was working, so they're out cleaning out their attics and cleaning out their farms and sheds and stuff, and they were pulling these trunks out. I got some of my most wished for trunks, some very rare, like my Maria Ryan trunk and my Church of England Waste and Strays trunk came to me during COVID. I mean, I would have given my back teeth to have those trunks, and here they are. George Green, when we talk about the brutality rained down on these kids, he was horrifically murdered by his mistress in 1895. When they found his body, it was on a straw bed in the basement of the home with a hole cut out. Oh, I think they actually moved it upstairs at that point, but anyways, read the newspapers, you'll get the story. But the hole was his toilet. And he was emancipated, he was full of marks and bruises and starved. He was made to sleep with the pigs. Made to sleep with the pigs. And, you would think that we would be concerned. Of course, you can find all kinds of articles about George Green in the newspapers. And I think that we would be concerned about the treatment of a child like that. But what we were concerned about was why Canada was letting that kind of child into our country. This is a cartoon that was published in Toronto. That's Dr. Bernardo by his sewer pipe. And the sewer pipe went from England into Canada. And that's how he was, bringing kids to Canada. Sewage, scum, gutter snipes, waifs and strays. And some of the words on that cartoons are slums of London, unsuitable, dangerous, unmanageable, moral and physical corruption, the Bernardo sewer pipe, stop the polluted stream. In Canada, you're hard-pressed to find any concern for the well-being of these children. We were more concerned that they were infecting our good Canadian stock with their diseases and their degeneracies. And that came from our medical professionals. It came from anyone know the Clark Institute in Toronto, Dr. C.K. Clark. He despised the home children. He said in one of his lectures at the Queen's University, he was the father of Canadian psychology. He said in Canada we are deliberately adding to our population hundreds of children bearing all the stigmata of physical and mental degeneracies. The next generation must be considered, but the harvest has already commenced. An insane person here from nowhere. Every last single child, no matter what their experience in Canada was put up against that kind of an attitude. They were tarred with the same brush the minute they stepped off that ship, and even before, and came into this country. A country who wanted their labor, a country who wanted their work, but didn't value the children. This is Frederick Nichols. He was head of the Canadian Manufacturers Association, and he was the head of the Canadian Manufacturers Association magazine. He was the editor. He wrote lengthy articles in his magazine against the home children. And this is one segment from a very long article that he wrote, when he said that these waifs and strays are tainted and corrupt, with moral slime and filth inherited from parents of the most foul and disgusting character, and all the cleansings and clean clothes that Dr. Bernardo may bestow will never possibly fit them so that they will become desirable citizens of Canada. He was also a member of our Canadian Parliament. There were tens of thousands of children brought to Canada who were at a great risk. There was no safeguards put into place. At least the ones that they did have, these Bernardos had something in place, but they were inadequate. They didn't protect the children. And after the murder of George Green, there was actually a law put into place in Ontario here in 1897, or it could have been 1891. There was a couple laws that came into place. Oh, it must have been 1897 because he died in 1895. But anyways, you would think that that law would have been put into place to help protect these children. The law was put into place to help protect us against that kind of child. There was no mention of looking after these children or doing better for them. It was how to protect us. And this was legal. The Custody of Children's Act in 1891 in the UK. It made it legal for the sending organizations to determine whether you were a fit or an unfit parent. So they literally and often did show up your doorstep and seize your kids. Now, I have an elderly dental patient who's from England, and I said to him one time, I said, do you know about the home children? He said, I sure do. And I said, can you tell me why? He said, because my mother was disabled, and he said we were forbidden to mention it outside of the home or to tell anybody. Because he said if the neighbors found out, they would call Bernardo's and we would have been taken from our home. So it doesn't just affect the kids. I mean, this had an enormous effect on everybody. The families, the communities, the children. So the Custody of Children's Act, said that they could then immigrate the children to the colonies, to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, wherever they took them, without any further notice to their parents. So they had, when your child was taken into care, seized, or you put them in there, you were stripped of your parental rights. So you no longer had the right to say what was going to happen to that child. That was the law. And they had the right to do what they wanted from that point forward, so they could, send them abroad if they wanted. Now, this is an after-sailing notice that was sometimes sent to families. Now, this is Winifred Payne from 1905, and Winifred Payne, it just said that she sailed for Canada sometime this month. Now, why some families received an after-sailing notice and others didn't, I'm not sure. I know this is a standardized form. The best that I can guess is that if you didn't give Dr. Bernardo's any problem with sending your child to Canada, then you may have received an after-sailing notice. But if they considered you immoral and drunk, and I don't know how many you have their Bernardo home records or any of the records for that matter, but you're not single parent on those records. They're all drunks and prostitutes and immoral and all the rest of it. I think you have to take what it says in those records with a grain of salt. If you can't prove it, then it may not have been that way. There certainly were a whole lot of families that were unfit to have kids, as there is today. But it makes you wonder what really was going on. In 1900, Dr. Bernardo published in his magazine, he published a whole series of magazines for the home children called The Ups and Downs. We held about 70 copies of The Ups and Downs. He names the children, and it gives stories, and the children write letters and stuff like that. It's a great resource to find out information about these kids. But he wrote that we are not so young and unsophisticated as to imagine that the farmers take our boys for love. The primary object of the farmers in taking a boy is that his services be useful to him. It says nothing here about love, okay? Like taking it for love, for adopting, for welcoming it into the family. And if Dr. Bernardo can tell you that in 1900, I don't know why we have an issue today with accepting that. I still hear that they came over, for a better opportunity. Well, being whipped and beaten and having your body put on a straw bed is not a better life. They were brought here to become indentured servants. This is a contract from Cecil Bennett. I call it forced orphanization for profit, because they forcibly orphanized these kids by removing them from the family, from cutting contact, and then they exploited them for their labor. Now, Cecil Bennett, this contract runs from September of 1907 until April of 1913. He earned a total of $120 minus expenses. So expenses could be if he needed a haircut, if he needed new boots, if he needed new clothing. And let me tell you, if he needed new boots and new clothing, they would charge his account for that and give that stuff to the farmers' kids. In a lot of cases. Not everyone was evil. But something, whether you got a good home or whether you got a bad home, it was a matter of luck. And that's all it was. And there was a forced donation of $1 a year in their contracts. So the boys had to sign contracts in the UK, and then they had these indentured contracts in Canada. $1 forced donation, well, Think if they were earning like a penny a day, like how many days did they have to work, free labor, so that they could get bananas a buck? I'm running out. I can have you here all afternoon. These are the postcards that they promoted, you know, for a better life. I'm going to start skipping through really fast here now. And the reality was that these were the farming houses, and there was nothing wrong with those farming houses, but you see that barn back there? That's where a lot of them were made to sleep because they didn't want the disgusting, diseased children in their family homes. Mostly after the 1890s, after 1890, most of the children came from families in need because Canada did not want the lower class of children. So you had three classes of children. You had your workhouse children, you had your children that were put in the institutions like Bernardo's, you know, that kind of stuff, and then you had welfare kids. Well, the workhouse children were considered the lowest of the low. So there were bonuses, there was money that exchanged hands between the sending organizations, the British government, the Canadian government. And in the beginning it was like $2 a head, you know, and but for workhouse children they wouldn't pay anything. So my mother wasn't even worth the $2 bonus to get her into Canada because she came from a workhouse. Money in 1909, there were 2,424 children immigrated. There were 15,417 applicants received. $3 was charged per application, non-refundable. So if you didn't get a kid, that was just too bad luck. You know, some did good, some did well. That was my Aunt Mary. She was whipped, beaten, raped, and gave birth to a stillborn baby at the age of 14 here in Canada. She was moved 20 times in 8 years. She suffered. And that's Cecil Bennett, the one that we just talked about with the indenture contract. With the boys, when their contracts were up, they were typically up at the age of 18. Girls was 21. And but they wouldn't get their pay until they were 21 years of age. So they have no education, no money, no jobs. What do you do? Well, I'll tell you what a lot of the kids did. They stepped up to the plate and enlisted to serve in our wars. We had over 25,000 enlistments between the First and Second World Wars. Cecil Bennett never saw a penny of his wage because he was killed in the Battle of Vimy Ridge long before he turned 21. But he was treated very, very well with his family. Why child migration stopped in Canada? I'll kind of just go through this one and then I'm going to have to pull the plug here. Because everyone said, well, it was the Depression that brought it down and stuff like that. And the Depression certainly had something to do with it, but that's not why it stopped. It started with the suicides of Johnny Payne and Charles Bulpett in the early 1920s. And that made newspapers across the world. By the 1920s, we were becoming a little bit more socially aware. And the children were also starting to speak out themselves in the newspapers. I'm finding that in my new search in the Globe and Mail. I wish I would have known that before. But they were speaking out about their treatment and stuff like that. So I'm finding all kinds of articles now. But it became unacceptable to misuse these children. And there was a lot of pushback, and it took years. There was a significant amount of pushback from the social workers, mainly in Ontario, to the government to start tightening up on child migration. And they made things extremely difficult. So there was new regulations and stuff that were brought in to help rein in, you know, all the stuff that was happening with these children. And they were no longer allowed to send massive parties of children, and, you know, like I could get into it, but we'd be here all afternoon. So by 1939, it came to a close, and it came to a close because the sending organizations did not like being told what to do, basically. They bucked back at the regulations that were being put into place. They pulled themselves out of Canada, and Australia was one of the main receiving places from, you know, for the home children from that point on. And the reasons for that is Australia were still not up to snuff with their childcare, and they were not regulated in Australia. And they also sent them to New Zealand and South Africa and stuff. So we're only just starting. Australia, they have the Child Migrants Trust in Australia, so Australia government did apologize for the abuse and exploitation of the children, and the UK apologized. Canada had their opportunity to apologize in 2010, and Jason Kenney, who was the immigration minister at the time, said that there's no need to apologize for the abuse and exploitation of hundreds of children brought to our shores. Why not? Right there, he's acknowledging that they were abused and exploited. To this day, we're continuing to pester the Canadian government to get an apology. And why did they owe an apology? Well, I just told you. They owe an apology for what they did, for the historical neglect and abuse, and also they owe us an apology for letting this ride underneath the carpet, for not acknowledging. There has never been an inquiry in Canada. There has been in Scotland and England now, and at Home Children Canada, we have worked with both of the inquiries. And we did work with the team in England, and we did get a compensation paid to the Home Children in Canada, the equivalent of about $35,000 Canadian each, but they acted so long, there was maybe only 100 people in Canada that got the compensation, but it was paid, and it meant a lot to the people that received that money. So we did get a House of Commons apology in 2018, which wasn't an official Government of Canada apology. It lasted for about 3 minutes in French. Just go through here. This is service in the war, silence, we don't know. There are records available in England for a lot of these kids. So if you haven't received your home child records from the UK, let me know or get in contact with us, and we'll help you find out if there's records available. Bernardo's is pretty comprehensive. That's my aunt, the one that was beaten and raped, and I know that because of the release of the records. So September 28th, I don't know if people know here, and we'll close with September 28th because that's important to know. It's our National British Home Child Day in Canada. So that was put into law in 2010, I think it is, around that time, or 2011, I think. It was British Home Child Day in the province of Ontario in 2018. The late Judy Neville lobbied, and we now have our National British Home Child Day. So September 28th, and what Home Children Canada has done to celebrate British Home Child Day is we started the Beacons of Light International Tribute, which started in 2019. And so what we ask is for cities to declare a British Home Child Day in the city wherever you live. We have paperwork, letters, we've got everything, if you want to take the lead and approach city councils and stuff like that, we have all the material that you could possibly need in our files at Home Children Canada. It's actually available online to the public. And any landmarks, like we have the CN Tower in Niagara Falls that illuminate in red, white, and blue. So we've got the Peace Bridge this year. We've got all kinds of stuff. There is a list now that's available in our Facebook group called Home Children Canada Research Group of all of the illuminations and tributes that we have so far coming on September 28th. It's a busy day for us, and we have so much traffic coming into the group and so many things to do on that day. And it's a brilliant way to celebrate the lives of the home children, because no matter what, these children, the vast majority of them, went on to create good lives for themselves in Canada, okay? They contributed to our nation. I call them the little nation builders of Canada, for that. And, and their service in the wars. And we have to understand where they came from. We have to understand what happened to them. But we also have to respect what they did for our country, and that they did create good lives and families who are their greatest legacy. But kindness. Thank you.
That was fascinating. Just before we take a couple questions, I just want to read to you a little thing from the Association of Children's Aid Societies. And it is a look back on the history of CASs. And it says, although some home children thrived, others were abused and exploited, and investigations into allegations of maltreatment were often inadequate. Much has been written about the harsh life circumstances of many of these children whose lives were not always easy and for whom promises made when leaving their homeland went unfulfilled. It's estimated that 12% of the Canadian population can trace its origins to a British home child. Yeah, so, this was written a couple of years ago. So, my grandfather was one of the first directors of the Toronto Children's Aid Society, and I have some of his academic writings from the 1920s, and they identify sort of the horrible circumstances that you would find children, both British home children and others in local communities. And this really has spurred me on to think, well, I'm going to find out more about this, because it's, I think it, while the CAS has existed prior to the 1920s, this makes reference, the article makes reference to the fact that they were working in conjunction with the Canadian government to improve the circumstances that were dire for the home children. And I guess it just absolutely reinforces that social workers were the ones, that were sort of leading the charge to shut down this kind of activity.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. And let's take like 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
When the home children became adults, did they get Canadian citizenship, and did they always know their own name, or did the families they stayed with give them their name?
Their names changed for a whole pile of reasons, and people that brought them into care probably didn't know how to spell names properly if it was somebody else. Shit's transcriptions, and also some of them did adopt new names. We have 2 Victoria Cross recipients, Walter Rayfield and I should know his name. Walter Rayfield, the other Victoria Cross guy, Claude Mooney, that's who it is. And both of them falsified their names on their records, so they did it themselves. So it's a really specialized area of trying to figure out these home children and trace their lives and trace them back to where they came from. Citizenship, there was no citizenship in Canada during the years that these guys came, so they were just naturalized into this country. And I do know people that continue to have problems to prove the heritage of their parents because they weren't given citizenship and records and stuff. My old grandfather had a problem. He became a poor guy, and he lived on the streets of Edmonton, and he had a problem trying to prove who he really was when it came time to get his pension. So he never did get a pension. Yes?
I have 2 questions. You mentioned different times England. Were Scotland and Ireland part of this?
I should really be saying the UK.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
The other question was, your mother was 2, so she was obviously boarded. Were the people that boarded children paid? And why was your mother not taken away again? Like, there must have been some families that boarded these young children that kept them.
Not if they came through like the regular sending organizations. They may have kept them on, but the children would have been indentured up until the age of 18. My mom came with the Salvation Army, which is more of a gray area. So all the different sending organizations maybe had a little bit different rules. She was boarded out in the community of Stouffville, and the next door neighbor was my adopted grandmother's sister. And my grandmother wasn't having children because all the females in her family were dying of childbirth. So she really wanted one, so the sister wrote her a letter and said, you should come over and see this little girl. So she came over and saw my mom and liked her and took her. And we really didn't do that. You see what I had to go through to get a rescue dog? You know, and it was just fortunate that my grandmother was a great person. She was educated, she was a school teacher. And in 1922, because Mom came in 1924, in 1922, legalized adoption came into play. And my grandmother went down to the lawyers and legally adopted my mother. Now that didn't have to, you know, honestly, with the home children, I have never seen another home child who was legally adopted. None of them. I mean, they may say adopted, but that's not legal adoption. Adoption just meant that you're looking after them in your house. But yes, some farming families kept the children for the duration of their childhood, and even extending past, you know, the expiration of their indentured contracts. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, and the other thing, you showed a picture of the trunk. Did each child have a trunk with belongings? Because I can't imagine they'd have that much.
Yes, they did. Each one of them were furnished with these. Mostly they were trunks, but some organizations like the Middlemore sent duffel bags, that kind of stuff. But again, the variety of trunks over, you know, all the 30 sending organizations. You know, I think we've actually found a trunk for most sending organization, and we even know what the duffel bags kind of look like, but.
So they did come with some.
They did come, but
supplies.
the trunks were very small. They were no bigger than maybe, you know, that. And, you know, there was no snowmobile suit in there or boots, and, you know, it wasn't until 1924 that the sending organizations had to send long pants with the kids. You know, standing in cow dung was a surefire way to warm up your feet on the farm. So you can imagine, like, I mean, some of these kids arrived right in the dead of winter. I'd like to know how they got through the ice, but there are records of them arriving in winter with, you know, inadequate clothing. It was, yes.
So when you try to trace your family history, can you get past your mom? Like, have you been able to identify the roots? You have.
Yep.
But that would be unusual, I would suspect, for a lot of.
No, I mean, with the home children, when I'm researching for people, I don't go digging right past there.
Right.
But once you break through who they were, when they were born, where they came from, the names of the parents and that kind of stuff, then it's up to the individual member then to start moving backwards. With my mom, yeah, I've traced them right back. I mean, you know, I know everything about them, and I've gone to Linden, Herefordshire a couple of times and have visited some of the homes and stuff. They know people are so nice. You just knock on their door and say, hi, my mom lived here 50 years ago or something, and come in for tea. I love it. But yeah, and you know, like I said, I don't do that depth of research for people because, you know, we have thousands of home children that we need to find. So, and our registry doesn't go back that far, but as long as you have the parents' names, and we will give you, you know, try to give you when they were born, where they died, perhaps where they're buried. But there's enough information there that if you're so inclined, you can start digging back further. But it's breaking through that, you know, and trying to get names right. Yes.
Did any of the organizations issue medals after they completed their indentured service?
Yeah, they did. I actually have medals at the back here. I have the two. It was Bernardo's that gave medals for good conduct. It wasn't issued at the end of your contract. It was issued if you managed to stay in your first placement for like 2 years. And I also have the Fagan medal back there. The Fagan medal was awarded to the Fagan boys that repaid their passage.
And I just have a final question for Lori. Lori, in recognition of her service and with this organization, with the British Home Children organization, she was invited to a garden party at Buckingham Palace. And I think she's probably the only one in the room who went to a garden party at Buckingham Palace. So tell us about that.
I mean, come on. It was a huge honor. actually funny because I got an invitation via email, and I said to my boss who just bought our dental practice, and I said to him, I said, oh, look, I said, I've been invited to a garden party at Buckingham Palace, and he looks at me and he said, so the Queen's using email now? And I'm thinking, want to look? That was in 2016. I was actually invited from Bernardo's because I have a very good working relationship with Bernardo's. They know how I feel. Well, they know the truth, not how I feel. I shouldn't say that because it's the truth. But I have a very good working relationship with most of the sending organizations in the UK, and it's to our benefit to maintain those relationships. And they were celebrating their 150th anniversary of work. So they actually invited me. So my sister and I, she was my date. So off we went to the UK. It was spectacular. Like, you know, it was just from the get-go, you know, and to be able to go in, you know, when you see the carriages come in and they've got that little covering and the red carpets, that's where we went in. Like, you know, we got to cross that yard, you know, where you see Prince William and Kate come out of, and, you know, they're in a courtyard and stuff, and we got to go through there and go up those steps. I mean, the history just there, it was super awesome. The garden party was wonderful too. I had often read about William and Harry being able to stand at the lake and they could hear the wildlife and they could hear the hum of the city of London all around them. So the first place I made a beeline for was that lake. And, you know, it definitely everything that they said, that you sit there and you can hear the water and the wildlife, and then you can hear that buzz of the city of London all around them. But, you know, we were, it was Queen Camilla that had, was hosting it that day, and Princess Sophie, and I think it was Princess Alexandra was there that day, you know, and they had cupcakes with little crowns on them. It was an honor.
A richly deserved invitation. I really want to thank you very much, Lori. It was a wonderful presentation. I encourage people to look at the quilt at the back and the poster, and there's books for sale, and there's the medals that were just referred to by the gentleman. And thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Maybe just 1 second, and so that Lori didn't repeat the story, but the quilt is fascinating. She'll just give us a little.
That quilt was commissioned by Home Children Canada in 2016. And every square on it represents a home child or a story of a home children. I do have a big binder at home with all the stories of the children that are on the quilt. But what makes it unique is that it's not made on the traditional cotton. I mean, certainly the fabric surrounding the squares is, but it's made from, I had them printed on flag material, like flags. I went to Flags on Limited, and then we had it sewn into this marvelous quilt. The quilter said she'll never do another one like it again because it was very, very difficult to make. But that quilt has traveled to the UK 3 times. It's been in England, Scotland, it's been in Wales, it's been across Canada. I can't even count the number of miles that are on that quilt, and it looks just as new. And I don't have to worry about it. I fold it up and I stick it on my online luggage, and it flies with me. I would never check in that quilt. I think Canada would be very angry if I lost it. But it comes online with me, and it's just a showstopper. So thank you.
Thank you.